Everybody Loves Raymond was one of the greatest sitcoms of all time, and at the center of it all was Patricia Heaton, who played Debra Barone. She made the world laugh for 9 unforgettable seasons, but most people never realized that behind the scenes, something very disturbing was quietly unraveling. What did the cameras never catch? Why was one cast member secretly furious? And how did Patricia Heaton hide a life-changing secret from the entire world, even while filming in front of a live studio audience? The untold story behind Everybody Loves Raymond is not what you'd expect, and it'll change the way you remember the show forever. How it all began. Before Everybody Loves Raymond became one of the most beloved sitcoms in American television history, it began with a simple idea rooted in Ray Romano's real life. At the time, Ray Romano wasn't a household name. He was a stand-up comedian, grinding his way through comedy clubs in New York, drawing material from the world he knew best. His family? His routines often revolved around being a husband and father, the chaos of raising kids, and navigating relationships with his overbearing parents. His delivery was dry, observational, and grounded in everyday reality. And so audiences related to it immediately. But the turning point came in 1995 when Romano made a career-changing appearance on The Late Show with David Letterman. That night, Romano didn't just make viewers laugh. He caught the attention of the right people in the room. David Letterman's production company, Worldwide Pants, saw something unique in Romano's style, and they believed this brand of humor could translate well into a sitcom. But instead of casting him in something generic, they wanted to build a show around him. That's when Phil Rosenthal entered the picture. A writer and producer with a knack for turning simple ideas into compelling television, Rosenthal was brought in to help develop the concept. But this wasn't going to be just another TV family. Rosenthal sat down with Romano and got to know the real man behind the stand-up act. He listened carefully to Romano's stories about his wife, his kids, and most importantly, about his intrusive parents who lived across the street. Romano spoke about how his mother would walk into his house unannounced, how his father was blunt to the point of being harsh, and how his older brother felt left out. It was rich material, and Rosenthal recognized that this wasn't just funny, it was game-changing. Rosenthal took all of it and shaped it into what would become Everybody Loves Raymond. The goal wasn't to glamorize or exaggerate family life. The idea was to present it as it really is: messy, complicated, annoying, and full of love. CBS was on board, but they made it clear that they wanted a show that reflected the reality of American families. They were looking for something that viewers could see themselves in, and that meant flawed characters, realistic conflicts, and dialogue that felt like it was lifted right out of your own living room. The Barone family was born directly out of Ray Romano's own family. Ray Barone, like Ray Romano, was a sports writer. Debra, his wife, was modeled after Romano's real-life spouse, Anna. Frank and Marie Barone, played by Peter Boyle and Doris Roberts, were dramatized versions of Romano's parents who were interfering, loud, over the top, yet ultimately well-meaning. And then there was Robert, Ray's older brother, whose character mirrored Romano's own sibling dynamic. Even the house layout in the show was inspired by the way Romano's actual family homes were arranged. Rosenthal's attention to detail made the show stand out. Rather than create glossy sitcom characters, he made sure every episode was grounded in something real. Scripts were often pulled directly from events in either Romano or Rosenthal's lives. Rosenthal has even said that if something didn't actually happen to someone in the room, it wasn't going in the show. This approach gave Everybody Loves Raymond a level of authenticity that resonated with millions. But despite its seemingly effortless success, getting the show off the ground wasn't easy. Romano wasn't an actor by training, and in the early days of production, there were real concerns about whether he could carry a weekly sitcom. CBS executives were skeptical. They ran test screenings, evaluated chemistry between the cast, and debated whether the show had legs. But Rosenthal insisted on staying true to the original vision with no laugh track manipulation. No big set pieces, just strong writing and believable characters. And that gamble paid off. When the show premiered in 1996, it didn't explode out of the gate with blockbuster ratings. But slowly, through word of mouth and a consistent slot, the show found its audience. Viewers kept coming back, not because it was groundbreaking, but because it was familiar. It mirrored the absurdity of real family life, and it didn't try to pretend otherwise. As the seasons rolled on, and the show became a fixture in American homes, few people realized just how much of it was actually drawn from reality. Behind every episode was a story that had been lived. And at the heart of it all was Patricia Heaton, whose portrayal of Debra brought both grounding and grit to the chaos. But even as she played the steady, no-nonsense wife on screen, something was going on behind the scenes that no one fully understood at the time. What nobody saw behind the camera. While Everybody Loves Raymond thrived on authenticity and was deeply rooted in real family dynamics, what most viewers didn't realize was just how much careful editing and intentional distancing went on behind the scenes, especially when it came to separating real life from fiction. From the very start, Ray Romano and Phil Rosenthal agreed they didn't want the audience confusing Ray Barone with Ray Romano entirely. It was important to have creative freedom without invading the privacy of Romano's actual family. That's why, early in production, they made one subtle but deliberate change to the names of the Barone children. In real life, Romano had 4 children, including a set of twin boys named Gregory and Matthew. When Everybody Loves Raymond was first pitched, the pilot script included these exact names. But Romano later decided it was too close for comfort. He didn't want fans to associate his real sons with the characters on screen. So the writers changed the twins' names in the show to Michael and Jeffrey. It might seem like a small detail, but it was a clear signal that the show was inspired by Romano's life, not a documentary of it. Another early adjustment that happened quietly behind the scenes involved the Barone twins themselves. In the unaired pilot episode, a different set of child actors played Michael and Jeffrey. However, once production began in earnest, the producers realized something wasn't quite working. The original twins were noticeably older than what the role called for. There was a disconnect between the ages of the children and the storyline. And so, the casting team made a decision to recast the roles. The final casting went to Sullivan and Sawyer Sweeten, real-life twin brothers who were just toddlers at the time. Their innocent charm and childlike timing helped make the Barone family feel more cohesive on screen. The Sweetens grew up on the show, and though they rarely had many speaking lines, their presence was central. It also added another layer of real-life parallel, since Romano himself was the father of twin boys off-screen. The audience never noticed the change, but it was one of many small behind-the-scenes choices that kept the tone of the show grounded and believable. But not everything behind the camera was subtle or logistical. Sometimes it was personal and very intentional. One example was Peter Boyle's casting as the gruff, outspoken patriarch Frank Barone. Boyle was already a well-known actor by the time Everybody Loves Raymond came around, with major roles under his belt. But most people didn't realize that Boyle's reputation for being cranky, blunt, and intensely private wasn't just an act. It was something that informed his performance. Casting directors were specifically looking for someone who could bring an edge to the character of Frank. They didn't want a sitcom dad who was soft around the edges or overly sentimental. They wanted someone real, someone whose bark could be felt even through the screen. Boyle's naturally gruff demeanor made him perfect for the role, even though it sometimes made him difficult to approach off-camera. But to the show's producers, that authenticity was gold. And the quest for realism didn't stop with casting older actors. It extended into delicate family dynamics, especially between Ray and his fictional brother Robert, played by Brad Garrett. In real life, Ray Romano's older brother, Richard Romano, was a respected New York City police officer. When he learned that a character based loosely on him was going to be featured in the show, Richard was supportive but cautious. He understood the need for dramatization, but he had concerns about how the show was portraying him. The character of Robert Barone was depicted as deeply jealous, insecure, and resentful of Ray's success. While these traits created plenty of comedic moments, they also painted Robert in a way that Richard didn't fully recognize. Richard later shared in interviews that while he was close to his brother, he felt the show exaggerated the sibling rivalry for laughs. The real-life relationship between the Romanos was, and still is, far more supportive and affectionate than the Barone brothers' often contentious bond. Despite his reservations, Richard Romano remained deeply involved with the show in his own way. He made several guest appearances throughout the series, usually in minor or background roles. He didn't shy away from the spotlight altogether, but he preferred to remain in the margins, allowing the fictional story to unfold without drawing direct comparisons to reality. His presence was a quiet acknowledgement of the line between real life and creative license, and a reminder that even when stories are inspired by truth, they don't always tell the whole story. These behind-the-scenes dynamics were actually never part of the public narrative while Everybody Loves Raymond was on the air. To viewers, the show felt seamless, but they never realized that every episode was the result of careful choices, compromises, and conversations that happened just out of frame. What makes these hidden details even more compelling is that they reveal just how complex and thoughtful the production process was. This wasn't a sitcom thrown together to meet a time slot. It was a carefully crafted series that honored reality while embracing fiction. Every character had layers. Every performance was shaped by something personal. And for Patricia Heaton, who played Debra Barone, the experience was no different. And while the cast members delivered one of the most memorable performances on television, behind the scenes, some of them were going through their own private challenges during those years. Not every star had it easy. While Everybody Loves Raymond delivered a near-perfect image of comedic family dysfunction on screen, the reality behind the scenes was far more complicated. Fame, success, and millions of viewers didn't exempt the cast from personal battles, tension, and heartbreaking losses. In fact, for some, the show's rising popularity only added fuel to deeply personal struggles that were impossible to ignore forever. Brad Garrett, who played the role of Robert Barone, carried some deeply personal struggles during those years. And while the cameras rolled and laughter echoed through millions of living rooms, he was fighting a private battle with alcoholism. Years later, Garrett would open up about what he endured behind his signature deep voice and towering physical presence. He described himself as a high-functioning alcoholic, someone who could memorize lines, hit his cues, and deliver the laughs, all while struggling silently with addiction. In interviews, Garrett admitted that his drinking wasn't visible to many people at the time. He didn't spiral in public. He didn't show up drunk to work. But alcohol was something he used to cope with pressure, isolation, and the emotional demands of both fame and personal life. He later credited therapy and a hard-won commitment to sobriety for helping him reclaim his life. But the truth remains that during some of the show's funniest episodes, one of its stars was dealing with something profoundly serious, alone. Perhaps the most devastating moment connected to the Everybody Loves Raymond legacy came not during filming, but years after the final episode had aired. Sawyer Sweeten, who had played one of the Barone twins, Jeffrey, since the age of 16 months, passed away under tragic circumstances in 2015 at just 19 years old. The news sent a shockwave through fans and former cast members alike. By the time of his passing, Sweeten had long since stepped away from acting and was living a quiet life with his family. There were no public warning signs, no red flags that hinted at the pain he was carrying. His death was sudden, and it left an enduring scar on those who had watched him grow up, both on screen and off. Patricia Heaton, Ray Romano, and other cast members expressed their heartbreak in public statements, mourning a young life that had ended far too soon. The Sweeten family later spoke out about the importance of mental health awareness, urging others to look out for signs of silent suffering, even in those who seem to be doing just fine. Sawyer's passing was a harsh reminder that no amount of fame, nostalgia, or TV magic could shield someone from the realities of mental health. Growing up on a set may have seemed like a dream to many, but for Sawyer, it came with pressures that are still not fully understood. Being recognized for a role he played before he could even speak meant that much of his identity was shaped by the show, and when it ended, the sudden silence may have left a void he didn't know how to fill. As the years passed, these behind-the-scenes struggles became part of the show's deeper legacy. Everybody Loves Raymond had been about the messiness of family life, about what it meant to fight, forgive, and fumble through everyday chaos. But in real life, the actors were dealing with chaos of their own, and not all of it had tidy punchlines or warm resolutions. And behind the chemistry that made Everybody Loves Raymond a classic, there were also moments of discomfort, miscommunication, and real emotional tension between the cast, some of which would simmer for years before ever being addressed. Because, as it turns out, even in a fictional family that fans grew to love, there were off-camera conflicts that sometimes mirrored the very dysfunction the show so cleverly portrayed. Tensions, drama, and unexpected feuds. For a show built on laughter, Everybody Loves Raymond had its fair share of behind-the-scenes tension, and some of it was too big to keep quiet. Though the cast shared a rare chemistry on screen, what happened off-camera wasn't always as harmonious, especially when it came to one uncomfortable topic: money. As Everybody Loves Raymond soared in ratings, so did Ray Romano's paycheck. By the show's later seasons, Romano was reportedly earning an eye-watering $1.8 million per episode, making him one of the highest-paid actors on television at the time. To be fair, he was the show's lead, its inspiration, and a co-creator in many ways. But the vast pay gap between Romano and his co-stars didn't sit well with everyone. Brad Garrett, who played Ray's older brother, Robert Barone, was among the first to speak up. Despite being a fan favorite and a crucial part of the show's dynamic, Garrett was making significantly less, reportedly around $160,000 per episode. The disparity wasn't just financial, it symbolized a broader sense of inequality and undervaluation. Garrett didn't keep his frustration private. He made headlines when he staged a walkout during contract negotiations, refusing to show up for a scheduled taping until his salary concerns were addressed. At the time, some viewed Garrett's stance as a bold demand for fairness. Others saw it as a risky move that could alienate him from his castmates and the network. But Garrett didn't back down. He was vocal about the need for ensemble shows to recognize the importance of every player, not just the lead. In interviews, he emphasized that Everybody Loves Raymond worked because of the chemistry among all the characters, not just one. But what started as quiet discontent eventually turned into a full-blown cast protest. Filming was delayed, and some of the cast members refused to return to set until new compensation deals were reached. The standoff lasted 2 full weeks. During that time, Patricia Heaton notably called out sick, citing illness as the official reason for her absence. But whispers around the studio suggested it wasn't just the flu. Many insiders believed it was a coordinated part of the protest, giving her space to show solidarity without making a public statement. Heaton had always been professional and fiercely committed to the work, but she was also keenly aware of fairness. As one of the most important members of the ensemble, her support was crucial. Whether or not she was truly ill remains unclear, but what was clear was the message that the cast was unified in their demand to be treated equally. Eventually, CBS and the production team gave in to some of the demands. The core cast received significant raises, not quite on par with Romano, but enough to bring them back to work and ease the tension. Still, the experience left a mark. It reminded everyone that behind the camaraderie was a business, and not everyone felt equally valued in it. And money wasn't the only source of tension. Even seemingly harmless events, like media appearances, caused internal friction. When Oprah Winfrey requested permission to film behind-the-scenes footage for her show, fans assumed the production team would jump at the opportunity. After all, Oprah was the most influential daytime host in the country, and her seal of approval could elevate anything. But to everyone's surprise, Phil Rosenthal, the show's creator, refused. He didn't want camera crews poking around during production. Rosenthal believed that part of what made Everybody Loves Raymond special was its intimacy. The writing, the timing, and the rhythm all depended on keeping a closed, focused environment. And allowing Oprah's crew to film, even briefly, felt like a disruption. His decision was respected, but it raised eyebrows. Turning down Oprah wasn't common in Hollywood, and it added to the growing narrative that there were deeper control issues at play behind the scenes. But that wasn't the only source of tension. Personal dynamics among the cast were just as complex. Patricia Heaton and Peter Boyle, who played husband and wife-in-law, had a famously fiery on-screen relationship. But off-screen, things weren't always smooth either. While they respected each other's talent, their personalities occasionally clashed. Boyle, known for being direct and occasionally irritable, sometimes butted heads with Heaton, who was outspoken in her own right. But their disagreements were never explosive. Instead, they simmered quietly. And beneath it all, there was a real bond. Boyle wasn't just a scene partner. He was someone who saw potential in Heaton and wasn't afraid to speak up when it mattered. In a particularly meaningful conversation, he once gave her advice that would stay with her for years. At the time, Heaton was quietly grappling with her own relationship with alcohol. Though it wasn't widely known, she had begun to question how much she was drinking and whether it was affecting her personal and professional life. Boyle, who had experienced his own journey of self-reflection, encouraged her to be honest with herself and not wait for a crisis to make a change. He reminded her that it was okay to step back, to reassess, and to reset. That moment stuck with her. Years later, Heaton would go public with her story of getting sober, crediting those early conversations and Boyle's quiet support as one of the turning points. Their minor disputes never defined their relationship. What mattered more was the mutual respect, and in Boyle's case, the wisdom he shared in private. These tensions paint a very different picture from the sunny living room audiences saw each week. The cast was tight, yes, but they were also human. They were flawed, proud, tired, and sometimes fed up. And in the middle of it all stood Patricia Heaton, a woman balancing fame, motherhood, and personal demons. While the world saw a sharp-tongued sitcom mom, she was quietly dealing with something else far more personal than any salary negotiation or on-set squabble. The secret Patricia Heaton kept hidden. Patricia Heaton was the heart of Everybody Loves Raymond. She was quick-witted, sharp-tongued, and effortlessly funny. Her portrayal of Debra Barone was grounded, relatable, and real. But behind the scenes, Heaton was dealing with real-life pressures that most fans had no idea about. Some of her struggles were so well masked that even longtime viewers never noticed them. Others became public only years after the show ended, forcing her to confront headlines she never expected. For starters, few fans realized that Patricia Heaton was actually pregnant twice during the early seasons of the show. During Season 1 and again in Season 3, Heaton was carrying children, while simultaneously playing the frazzled but razor-sharp Debra. And yet, not once was her pregnancy written into the show. The production crew and writers found clever ways to hide her growing baby bump by using oversized sweaters, kitchen counters, laundry baskets, and strategically placed furniture. It was a visual sleight of hand pulled off so seamlessly that even devoted fans were unaware. The decision to hide her pregnancy wasn't just a creative one, it reflected Heaton's deep desire to keep her private life from interfering with her work. She didn't want special treatment. She didn't want the storyline to shift. She wanted to do her job, deliver her lines, and go home. But that determination came with its own cost. Filming a sitcom under the pressure of weekly deadlines is already exhausting, but doing so while pregnant was an entirely different level of challenge. Outside the studio, Heaton was also a mother to 4 sons. Balancing motherhood and a lead role on a hit television show meant that her off-camera life was a constant whirlwind. She would shoot scenes in front of a live audience, then rush home to tend to diapers, homework, and sleepless nights. In interviews, she later admitted that the juggling act often left her feeling completely spent. But Heaton didn't complain. She kept smiling, she kept showing up, and she kept it all hidden. That need for control of her image, work, and her household wasn't just about professionalism, it was also about protecting herself. Because when the cameras eventually stopped rolling, life wasn't always smooth. In 2009, 3 years after Everybody Loves Raymond ended, Heaton found herself in the middle of a very public lawsuit. Her former personal assistant sued her for unpaid wages, forced overtime, and meal break violations. The assistant alleged that she had worked long hours without proper compensation and was denied basic labor rights under California law. For Heaton, who had built her brand on warmth and strength, the lawsuit was both embarrassing and damaging. Though the case was eventually settled quietly, it offered a rare glimpse into the friction behind her public image. That wasn't the only controversy she faced. In 2012, Heaton came under fire for a series of tweets targeting Sandra Fluke, the Georgetown law student who testified before Congress about access to birth control. Fluke had become the target of conservative commentator Rush Limbaugh, who made widely criticized comments about her character. Heaton, a vocal conservative and pro-life advocate, tweeted several sarcastic remarks in line with Limbaugh's stance, mocking Fluke's testimony and questioning the need for government-funded contraception. The backlash was swift. Fans who admired Heaton's acting were taken aback by the tone of her remarks. She was accused of insensitivity, with many pointing out that mocking a woman for discussing healthcare access wasn't just political, it was personal. Within days, Heaton deleted the tweets and issued an apology saying, "I apologized to Ms. Fluke last week. I may not agree with her views, but I didn't treat her with respect, and I'm sorry. I was wrong." But the incident left a mark. It reminded people that behind the sitcom, Mom was a woman with strong political views, and sometimes those views collided with her fan base's expectations. The controversies didn't end there. In recent years, Heaton also made headlines by criticizing Disney's casting decisions, particularly when the company began pushing for more inclusive and diverse representation. She called out Disney and Pixar for casting Chris Evans instead of Tim Allen as Buzz Lightyear in the new Toy Story spin-off, and critics accused her of tone deafness and failing to embrace progress in an evolving industry. For Heaton, these moments were never meant to be career-defining, but in the age of social media, public perception can shift quickly. Fans who once saw her only as Debra Barone now had a more complex picture of a working mom, a woman of faith, a fierce conservative, and someone who occasionally found herself on the wrong side of a headline. In the end, the secret Patricia Heaton kept hidden wasn't just about pregnancies or paychecks. It was about how much she carried, privately, quietly, and without seeking praise. While fans laughed at her sarcasm and admired her timing, few knew the pressure she was under. She wasn't just playing Debra Barone, she was navigating a personal life full of complex decisions, controversial moments, and emotional sacrifices. But Everybody Loves Raymond wasn't just a sitcom. It was a snapshot of real family life, with all its sarcasm, chaos, warmth, and flaws. Over its 9-season run, the show collected 15 Emmy Awards, solidifying its place in television history. It became a cultural touchstone for its sharp writing, brilliant ensemble cast, and honest take on marriage, parenting, and in-law tension. What made the show special wasn't just the jokes, it was the authenticity. And that authenticity came at a price. Behind the scenes, the cast faced salary battles, personal struggles, and difficult negotiations. But through it all, they showed up every week for nearly a decade with performances that still hold up to this day. Despite the moments of tension, there was respect. The cast may have disagreed off-camera, but when the lights went on, the chemistry was undeniable. The Barones felt real because the actors brought their whole selves to the work, even the parts they kept hidden. Patricia Heaton especially embodied that duality. She smiled for the cameras while managing pregnancies, career pressure, and personal challenges. She fought for fairness, stood her ground, and even stumbled at times. But what emerged was a portrait of a woman deeply committed to her craft and willing to carry more than anyone knew to keep the show running smoothly. Everybody Loves Raymond wasn't perfect, but that's exactly why it remains beloved. Because underneath the laughs was something rare. Truth. Who was your favorite character from Everybody Loves Raymond? Tell us in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen. Like this video and subscribe to our channel for more updates.